Let's look now how to create loops in Python. In Python, to iterate over a loop, we use the for statement. So if I type for, you can see it is colored green. That means it's a reserved word in Python. So let's say I want to use a index I in range 3, and I will explain what that means. So to end a for loop statement, we indicate with the column marker. So in this case, in and range are also reserved Python names. And in the case of range, this is creating a range of values with total length 3. And since Python starts from 0, this means that I'm iterating over 0, 1, and 2. So just to demonstrate that, let's print I on the screen. So as I go through this loop, I is changing value from 1 to 0, 1, and 2. Say I want to append those indices into a list. So I create a indices list, which is empty at this point. And then I can come here and append I. And at the end, I can take a look at the result. So here I'm creating an empty list. I'm iterating over 3 items, and I'm appending those indices to this indices list. And the result is the appended numbers. As you can see, everything that's within the tab is considered in the loop. And once I exit the loop, I have to remove that tab. Simple loops like this, especially the ones used to create lists, can be written in a much more compact way, which is called list comprehension. So in this case, I could rewrite and get the same result by doing indices and then starting a list, and I can write the loop inside the list. And for that, what I do is I want to add I to the list for I in range 3. So this loop is going to be used to create this list. And the result of this is basically the same as the loop I show above. So far, we have seen how to iterate over some indexes generated by this range function. In Python, we can iterate over elements of a data container. So to demonstrate that, I will use a list. So let's create a list. Let's call it alterations. The first one is potassic, second one is city-citic, and third one is propylitic. So alterations is now a list with 3 elements in it. And now what I can do is to iterate over all the alterations inside this list. So for instance, I can say for alt, and alt is going to be the variable holding the value inside the loop in alterations. And then what I can do is just to print alt. So for every iteration of this loop, alt is going to take one of the values inside the alterations list. So if I run this cell, I will print first potassic, then city-citic, and then propylitic. We could use the indexes to iterate over the list. For instance, I could do for I in range 3 and do a print alterations I. So for each iteration here, I is going to take the index 0, which is pointing to the first location, and then index 2, which will point to the second location, and so on. So this generates the same result. However, since the final objective of iterating over the alterations is to have access to the element of the alterations, the form I showed before is much more preferred over this form. Depending on the data container we are iterating over, there are some different behaviors or different functions we could use. So far, I demonstrated how to iterate over lists, which would be very similar to iterating over tuples. But let's see how iteration over a dictionary works. So if I do range equals range 1, range 2, range 3, and build a dictionary just like we did before. There's a problem here, it's just missing a comma. There we go. We can now iterate over the items on dictionary. So if I just do for, and then something here, I'll just name it key and I'll explain why. Key in ranges, and then I can just print key. So when we iterate over a dictionary without specifying anything, we are actually iterating over the keys and not the values. So I could, for instance, do a print and say variogram and then key, and that's going to be replaced by range 1, range 2, range 3, and then I could access the key on my dictionary. So this will actually access the value of that key. So now if I print that, what I'm printing on screen is variogram and then range 1, which is the key, and then the value, which I can access by using the key directly on the dictionary. We already saw that we have access to ranges keys specifically and range values specifically. So for instance, I could do for value in ranges values print value. So in this case, I'm iterating over values specifically, and I could iterate over the keys, and that's exactly the same behavior as not specifying anything. But we can also iterate over both key and value using the dictionary.items. So items is a special function for dictionary that will allow us to iterate over both the keys and the values. So now this becomes a little simpler because I do not have to access the key within my dictionary anymore. I can just print the value automatically or directly.